Thank you all for making time in your day and in this very busy spring season to join our webinar on equitable housing decarbonization, visualizing intersection. My name is Jenny Lowe, a program manager at Build It Green. We're excited to kick off this event and what we mean by visualizing intersections. But first, we wanted to give a shout out to our event partners. First is the Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County, who has been a wonderful partner. They hosted a number of great events in person and virtual during Affordable Housing Month in May. Chloe will share the link to learn more about them in the chat. Second, our second partner for this event is Silicon Valley at Home. They have a few more events left on their Affordable Housing Month calendar. So if you like to learn more, head over to the other link Chloe is sharing in the chat. And then before we dive into all the presentations, I wanted to point out a few webinar features for folks in this virtual space that's available. These features are found as buttons on your Zoom toolbar, which is usually located at the bottom of your screen. So first is chat. Chat is enabled for everyone here. So click on the chat button to join the dialogue, talk with each other, share resources. It is fully enabled for you guys to use and chat with each other. Next is a Q&A box. So that is also available for you to drop in your questions. We'll have a Q&A after each speaker. So please share your questions in the Q&A box. Third, for those who would like captions during this event, you can click on the Show Captions button. And lastly, you can use reactions during this webinar. So by clicking on a specific reaction, you can set up a support as a heart, applause for moving segments, or even a shock face for new and mind-blowing information. So feel free to just use these reactions throughout the webinar. And if you want to test it out now, feel free to do that as well. Now, for today's panelist, let's see, sorry. So this is our panel for today. I'll be monitoring this wonderful panel featuring Danny from BEI, Alyssa from CPUC, and Kiara from the Rising Sun Center for Opportunity. I'll share a little bit more about each of them before each of their presentation. And Q&A again will be happening after each presentation, so please use the Q&A box to ask your question. A little bit about myself. I am a program manager at Build It Green, and I have been supporting and leading efforts to address intersectional issues of sustainability, housing affordability, and equity through collaborations like the Power Group and Scaling Equitable Housing Co-ops Initiative. Now, I want to share a little bit about background on Build It Green itself. Some of you may know us in connection with our well-known residential green building certification program, Greenpoint rated. In recent years, we have been returning to our roots in connecting change makers across California to advance housing affordability, equity, and environmental goals. We create change by convening stakeholders, enabling them to work collaboratively, and developing their capacity to move beyond their silos. So this visual communication tool we're sharing at this event came out of a convening of stakeholders in our Affordable Equitable Decarbonization Working Group. And now to unveil the visual communication tool we've been referencing. So I'll be unveiling it bit by bit, so it's easier to take in. So when you see the full diagram, it won't be too overwhelming. So this diagram, as you can see, and noted in our event title, is centered on equitable housing decarbonization. There are 7 critical elements that influence and interweave with each other to truly advance and reach equitable housing decarbonization. So starting from the left, and going clockwise, there are sustainability, health, workforce, community, education, policy, and financial. Again, all these elements are interconnected with one another, and the scope can be quite large. So in the development of these elements in our working group, we focus on a vision of advancing equitable housing decarbonization centered on a human-centered communities so they can thrive. So let's dive into one of these elements. First, let's do sustainability. So just sharing with you, each larger, darker circles are representing like themes that has risen out. So the smaller circles are specific visions in relation to, in the sense, element of sustainability and around that theme. And it captures a vision of how do we move forward so we can have equitable communities as we decarbonize our homes. And for some of these, you can see that they are connected with other elements. For instance, under building materials, homes, one of the visions, homes made of materials that don't contribute to human health issues. So that's connected to the health issue. Other ones may be just specific to sustainability, like in the life cycle view, we're just decarbonizing material supply chain. So next element is health. So again, there are the themes of physical health, access to comfort, mental health, and informed choice. And around each of these larger circles are smaller circles that are lifting up specific visions on how do we enable and ensure health in the space of equitable housing decarbonization and for communities to thrive. And again, these are visions that we want to see that will be happening or needed to happen. So some of these are, as we were sharing as earlier, connected to some of the other elements in the diagram, such as mental health, reduced fear of increased costs from decarb home improvements, or access to comfort. Comfort is not a privilege, but how we provide for all. All those are connected to the communities element. Or there's another one that is on informed choice, and where buildings, infrastructure, and other necessary facilities are easy to access with high quality and zero carbon transit options. So that's connected to sustainability elements. So the next few slides, I'll be breezing through a little bit quickly, just so we can make room for our wonderful presentations. But this is the workforce, the themes that have risen strongly from this one: labor standards, quality careers, accessible and abundant training, community with existing communities thrives, agency for disinvested communities, uprooting structural and systemic racism, community ownership, accessibility of decarbonized housing. And then education, we want to ensure there's effective partnerships and information sharing, community guides, systems knowledge, technical knowledge, and that education itself is just above what is the baseline. Then for policy, it should be people focused, that the good choice is the easy and legal choice, is accessible and grounded, and streamlining. And lastly, for financial, is focused on system reform. Disinvested communities are prioritized, the funding pie grows, and decarb is incentivized. And now putting it all together, we have our full diagram. So this is why I'm showing it a bit, so that it's a little bit easier to take in. So you're trying to see all these elements are connected with each other, and we're capturing these relationships visually for you to see here. And so with this brief introduction to the equitable housing decarbonization space and its interrelationships, I'll be passing the floor onto our speakers so you can see these different elements come to life and hear on-the-ground stories of working towards a future so communities thrive as we decarbonize their homes. So let me introduce our first speaker, Danny Mackis. Danny has been an assistant director with the Building Electrification Institute, BEI, since 2021. BEI is a nonprofit that partners with cities across the country on equitable building electrification efforts. Danny focuses on helping her city partners thoughtfully design and iterate on electrification programs and policies to ensure equitable outcomes across health, affordability, and workforce development. Danny previously worked on the City of Oakland sustainability team, where she helped develop Oakland's 2030 Equitable Climate Action Plan and implement key actions focused on building electrification, transportation electrification, and climate resilience. Before her role in Oakland, Danny worked for the U.S. Green Building Council, where she communicated the benefits of the green building sector to diverse audiences and earned her LEED Green Associate accreditation. Danny, the floor is yours.
Great, awesome. Let me set up my screen. Okay, can everyone see that? You all good? Cool. Okay, hi everyone. Thanks so much to Jenny and the Build a Green team for inviting me today. I'm really excited to see some familiar faces on this call and some new faces too. As Jenny mentioned, I'm Danny Mackis, an assistant director with the Building Electrification Institute. BEI currently partners with city governments across the country, typically with sustainability staff, but we also work with housing agencies, planning departments, economic development departments, mayor's offices, and others. And kind of along that same note, our advising and support for our city partners really focuses on intersections of issues. So building retrofits and health, building retrofits and housing affordability, et cetera. So this diagram graphic is really relevant to our work, and all the intersections are really top of mind for us. So sorry, 1 second. So today I'm going to provide a brief overview of the benefits and risks of residential building electrification, just to set a solid baseline of information for the group. And then I'll dive into the need for policies and programs to ensure equitable benefits, especially for existing residential electrification. And I'll discuss examples from 2 BEI cities. So going into the benefits and risks, it is not a given that this building electrification transition will be equitable. But if we are intentional about this process, which is a big if, then there are many potential benefits within this transition. We can create thousands of local clean energy sector jobs annually. We can realize better health outcomes by improving both indoor and outdoor air quality. We can address a broader set of long-standing health, safety, and resilience needs in our underinvested building stock, including providing, an opportunity to address insufficient space heating and cooling, which is a growing need as we have more extreme weather events. When electrification is planned right, we can potentially lower energy bills. We can potentially create more affordable housing. Not only by building more new all-electric affordable housing, but also helping preserve and increasing affordability in existing buildings too. And we can really invest in creating a local and regional clean energy economy, because really building decarb efforts would create multi-billion-dollar markets across many cities and regions, which is a huge opportunity. And so I think all these benefits really speak to the fact that buildings touch our lives in so many different ways: our jobs, our housing, our health. And equitable building electrification would lean into these intersections and work across sectors so that we can really ensure that multiple benefits come to fruition. However, as I mentioned, the potential benefits of building electrification are not guaranteed, and there are also risks we face if we do not ensure an equitable transition. And we know it's important for public agencies to really understand these risks that we need to avoid, so that our efforts do not exacerbate existing inequity. And so these risks can include that housing and rental costs increase if landlords pass along the cost of upgrades to their tenants. Energy bills can increase, tenant harassment or displacement, as well as as the risk of longer term gentrification and displacement. And instead of creating high road jobs, you can actually create low quality jobs that can't support families. So the benefits of electrification could simply just fail to reach those who most need them, and affordability and quality of life crises that we're in now will simply continue. And these outcomes could really further erode community trust and buy-in to this long-term effort to electrify our buildings. I want to pause and just highlight 2 of the bigger topics within these intersections. The first is housing affordability, which is one of the key risks in this transition, and BI has done a lot of thinking on this. And so I'm sure it's no major surprise to say this, but cities across the country are facing a housing affordability crisis. We are increasingly a nation of renters, and at least 40% of renters, and actually at this point, it's probably closer to 50%, are housing cost burdened across the US, meaning that they pay 30% or more of their income on housing and utilities. And the impacts of housing affordability crisis are magnified in communities of color, where rent burdens are significantly higher as a direct result of historic and ongoing racist policies at the hands of local or public agencies. And so residential building electrification really means going into people's homes and installing new efficient electric equipment. And without proper planning and protections, this process can absolutely pose a threat to renters and exacerbate displacement or housing unaffordability. And then the second critical issue I wanted to spotlight is that many buildings must implement health and safety repairs first before energy efficiency and electrification retrofits can be implemented. For example, mold and asbestos may need to be remediated before installing new equipment in various parts of a building, or the roof may need to be replaced to ensure structural soundness before installing new equipment. And this is especially common in buildings housing people with low and moderate incomes, including unregulated or naturally occurring affordable housing, which has long suffered from disinvestment in the US. But also because most energy incentive programs don't account for this reality. Anywhere from about 20% to 60% of program applicants to federal weatherization and utility incentive programs are ultimately deemed ineligible due to these outstanding maintenance issues. And so this program design that we have perpetuates inequity, not only by excluding folks from the clean energy programs, but also just leaving them in hazardous and substandard housing so they get neither improvement for their housing. So that was a super quick overview of potential benefits and risks. And at BEI, we work with cities to pursue policies and programs that can deliver on the benefits and avoid the risks, which I'll dive into now. So in order to ensure that the benefits of this transition are equitably distributed, we can't just focus on new buildings. We have to ensure that existing housing is appropriately reached. And from our experience working across our partner cities, we found that voluntary action will not be enough to accelerate this transition for 100% of buildings, and that in order to advance action, governments will need to pursue policies that go beyond voluntary and actually require existing buildings to make retrofits. And so here's a brief list of examples of policy requirements for existing buildings. This is not comprehensive, it's just some that might be a bit more common. On the left are building level policies that local, regional, state agencies can pursue, such as building performance standards. For the sake of time, I won't dive into any of these. This is really just to speak to the kinds of policy requirements that I'm talking about. So policies that, set targets for a building's energy performance, or policies that require that when a piece of equipment fails or a house is being sold, then new efficient electric option must be installed. And so on. And utilities can also pursue a more managed transition plan in collaboration with their local agencies, which you can see on the right. However, while we will need policy requirements to reach 100% of existing buildings, these requirements must also be prepared with what we call supportive programs. And so this can include technical assistance to help building owners and contractors comply with the technical elements of a policy. Supportive programs can also include funding, such as equipment incentives that will cover direct retrofit costs. And providing supportive funding will really help ensure that low-income homeowners will not bear the cost of retrofit requirements. And I spoke to this a bit earlier, but there's also an opportunity for public agencies to include renter protections attached to their public funding. For example, if a landlord wants to receive public funding to upgrade their building, then they must commit to something like, not passing off specific costs to tenants, or not increasing rent for X amount of years, or other tenant protection approaches, which will ultimately help avoid housing displacement. And you can also attach,
just FYI, you have 2 minutes left. Thank you.
Okay, cool. You can also attach workforce standards onto public funding, so you can achieve higher job outcomes as well, which Kiara is going to dive into. And so when these kinds of support services are combined, so technical assistance to comply with new policies, local funding, even the support to braid support to help people braid existing funding programs at the utility and federal and state levels, so application support, et cetera. When all of these kinds of support services are combined, they're also referred to as a one-stop shop, or a coordinated space to really hold people's hands through the transition. Okay, I know I've rushed through a lot of background, so I'm going to talk now through 2 quick examples from BEI cities who have really exemplified this approach of they've adopted existing building policies, but they've matched those requirements with supportive programs. The first one is Denver. So Denver voters enacted a sales tax in 2020 that is generating around $40 to $50 million annually for a new climate protection fund. And half of their funding is being targeted towards Denver's under-resourced communities. And then in 2021, Denver enacted a groundbreaking Energize Denver ordinance, which included both a building performance standard and it requires electrification in all commercial and multifamily buildings at the time of system replacement when cost effective. And Denver recognized the potential cost and housing affordability challenges of the law. So they're allocating a significant portion of these funds toward their incentive program to support compliance with the Energize Denver law, particularly for under-resourced buildings or what they call equity priority buildings. And we're seeing more and more cities and communities take climate funding into their own hands because even all of the funding from states and the federal funding sources coming out will not be enough for every building, and local sources will be necessary to complement those sources. And as I mentioned earlier, you can attach conditions onto local funding, such as tenant protections and workforce standards, which is a great opportunity to achieve multiple goals. And then really quickly, the other example is New York City. So New York City adopted their building emissions law in 2019, which requires building upgrades to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for all buildings greater than 25,000 square feet. And then the New York City Retrofit Accelerator was launched by the city to provide free technical assistance services to help building owners comply with the law. And the accelerator is funded at roughly $10 million per year for the first 3 years. It doesn't directly distribute funds. So unlike Denver, they do not provide city funds to directly fund the retrofits, but they really help building owners stack funding from multiple streams available across the state, utility, and federal funding programs. And they also help building owners select projects, hire contractors, and understand how to comply with the new law. So another great example of a one-stop shop approach that's really essential for coordinating a complex market and particularly helping building owners with less resources get the support they need to comply. Okay, those are all the slides I have for today. My last note is that a big question I didn't address was the how. So how should public agencies go about designing these policies and programs? And of course, this would be in close collaboration with their local communities, which I believe Alyssa is going to dive into more on her presentation and her work. So excited to learn more about that. And yeah, happy to take any questions.
So we'll start a Q&A session for Danny. Thank you all for submitting questions. So for our first question that we have for you, Danny, is from Christina. She says, aloha from Hawaii. She's wondering if you're currently working with Hawaii on supportive programs, policy, affordable housing plans for their state, and if it's so, she would love to learn more. And if not, how does she get connected with stakeholders there?
Yeah, so BEI is not currently working with any cities in Hawaii. We currently have 12 city partners across the country right now, and we're definitely looking to expand, but aren't quite there yet with staff capacity. So yeah, unfortunately, we're not working directly in Hawaii. We are very interested in peer learning. I'm not super familiar with what's going on in Hawaii, but if there are opportunities to kind of share best practices from BEI cities with Hawaiian stakeholders, please feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to kind of coordinate and share some of those lessons.
And I think there's a request, Danny, on first from Sev in the chat that's like, it's a great presentation, and if you feel comfortable, if you can drop your email in the chat, because I understand the presentation went by really quickly and they will like to connect. Thank you for sharing
Definitely.
that.
No problem.
Another resource, oh, Danny, I think you just shared it with hosts and panelists. If you want, I think you would have to drop on for everyone.
Yes.
And then another request for information is that if you can provide a link to the Denver program.
Yes, absolutely. I will provide that once the next panelist goes in. And yeah, I'll follow up with a couple of resources in the chat.
Great, thank you. So one question that I have is that what are helpful strategies to normalize stakeholders that these like integrated community-focused approaches are tangible and effective solutions? because it's just much more complex than they're used to. So how do you normalize it with stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely understand that it's scary and hard to try these new approaches. And I just really do want to underscore this approach is really only tangible and effective if you're working with people to design policies and programs that actually meet specific localized needs. So the key is to have a goal to, involve people who could be affected by the policy or program who are typically left out of the process, and to set up a structure with them that allows for like building mutual trusting relationships. We've seen in our cities that the most successful policies and programs have large winning coalitions, where people really see themselves in the goals and approaches of the policy or the program. And so you can try a few different messages to your stakeholders about the value of making this kind of time and resource investment into these policies and programs. For example, you can elevate that if we leave low and moderate income communities behind in this transition, we actually will not achieve our climate goals. We won't reduce enough greenhouse gas emissions if we leave all that housing behind. Or that skipping over community engagement can actually lead to political backlash or policies. And so it is important to set expectations that this process may take a little longer, but it is worth it in the end. And this isn't hypothetical. We've seen cities' policies being threatened with lawsuits and plagued by compliance issues, even in progressive cities, when the process was rushed or there wasn't a strong enough coalition on board with the policy. So yeah, rushing the process, leaving people out will ultimately slow down progress in the long run, and reduce likelihood of success.
Thank you, Danny. And I think we're running quite short on our Q&A, okay. But I wanted to see if there's one last note you want to share with the audience before we move on to our next presenter.
No, I mean, thank you all so much. Happy to answer questions, and please feel free to email me. BEI's website has a lot of resources that add more detail. I kind of sped through a lot of topics, and our website has resources that have more detail, including on kind of our approach to co-creation with communities and key considerations on design and whatnot, which I wasn't able to dive into today. So I'll put some stuff in the chat so other folks can dive in if they would like.
Okay. Thank you, Danny. And I think there's also a comment in the chat if you want to respond to that. So I'll leave the conversations in the chat with Sev with it related to EV. So on that note, I am going to move on to our next presenter, Alyssa. And sorry for moving on. There's a lot to pack in for today, but Alyssa is a regulatory analyst in the Energy Division at the California Public Utilities Commission. She focuses on the intersection of equity and building electrification and currently oversees the San Joaquin Valley Affordable Energy Pilot Program and the Mobile Home Park Utility Upgrade Program. Previously, she worked at Energy Foundation, where she supported advocates working to advance clean energy policies across the Western US. Lisa, please take it away.
Thanks, Jenny. Hi, everyone. As Jenny mentioned, I should probably share my screen. Give me one sec. Can you see my screen? That's good. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa, as Jenny mentioned, and I work for the California Public Utilities Commission. We are the state body that regulates a lot of things, but including that is electric investor-owned utilities, natural gas companies, telecommunications, and a bunch of other things. So I'm the lead analyst of the San Joaquin Valley Affordable Energy Pilot Program. I'm seeing in the comments that folks are also interested in intersection with affordable housing. And I'll note, if anyone wants to connect later, I'm also overseeing the Mobile Home Park Utility Conversion Program, where we are looking at potential electrification of manufactured housing. So just a quick overview of what I'll be talking about today. I'll say that this pilot program is quite multifaceted, so I won't talk about every aspect of it in depth. There's certainly not enough time, but I'll try to focus on the progress we've made and lessons learned. So just a quick background. In 2014, the state passed Assembly Bill 2672, which directed the CPUC to identify disadvantaged communities in the San Joaquin Valley, many of which lack access to natural gas and instead use propane and wood for heating and cooking. These fuels are usually more expensive than natural gas and lead to quite high energy costs. So the CPUC was tasked to find ways to increase access to more affordable energy for these communities, and then to ultimately assess the economic feasibility of these options and see how it could potentially expand these options to other communities in the San Joaquin Valley. So a proceeding, which is sort of where a lot of these issues are discussed and debated and policies are made, was opened in 2015. And I'll also note that this proceeding did not actually start off as initially as a building electrification focused proceeding. I think maybe the initial intent was trying to extend gas lines to a lot of these communities, which didn't have access to natural gas. But as building electrification policy continued to mature, and that was sort of the direction that the state and the CPC was heading in, a lot of these, this pilot sort of turned into a building electrification focused pilot instead of building out more gas infrastructure, although there is a component of that in this pilot. So I just wanted to note that because I'll be talking mostly about the electrification portion of this pilot. Quickly, there are 3 phases to this proceeding. The pilot is really sort of under phase 2. In phase 3, which is yet to start, we're going to assess the cost effectiveness of the options that were offered to these pilot communities and see whether or not, or in what form, we would expand the offerings to the remaining pilot communities. Okay, I'm going kind of fast here. So the actual pilots, the CPUC approved $57 million to the pilot program, both for outreach and implementation, as well as the evaluation. There are 11 pilot communities that comprise about 7,400 households. I will note that California City, which you see sort of on the bottom here, they have both an electrification as well as a gas line extension pilot. That's the only community that is getting gas line extensions. All the others receive electrification. Generally, these communities are low income, 85% qualify for care, and they're, majority are actually owner occupied, but there's still a significant renter population. Okay, so the components of the pilot. The pilot was available to all residents in these 11 communities. Folks would opt in, they would submit an application, and then they would receive an in-depth home assessment. And if they were deemed eligible, then they would receive 4 new all-electric appliances to replace their propane or wood equivalents. So they received a heat pump water heater, heat pump HVAC system, induction range or stoves, and then electric clothes drying equipment, and any associated upgrades required to accommodate that equipment. So that included rewiring, panel and service upsizing, and sort of other things that would be needed to accommodate these appliances. This program, I was really liking what Danny was mentioning, because this program really tries to encompass a lot of making sure everything happens at once. You have contact with a customer, so try to make sure they take advantage of a lot of the other programs that are offered by the CPUC. I have a bunch of alphabet soup here, but these are programs that include offering incentives for battery energy storage, rooftop solar, weatherization to increase the efficiency of the house, etc. Oops, that was not. There's also a bill protection component of this program. As I mentioned, the original intention of this program was to make sure that folks had more access to more affordable energy. And this being a pilot, we weren't really sure what it would do to folks' bills. So we didn't really want a bill shock to hit the participants. And so there are 2 20% discounts layered on each participant's bill. There's sort of a 20% flat SJV discount, and then there's a 20% transitional solar discount. That's basically a stand-in for if folks were to enroll in a community solar green tariff program or a disadvantaged green tariff program. Some of those programs weren't available for participants. And so instead, folks got sort of this placeholder 20% discount. All being said, this amounts to about 36% off folks' bills over a course of 10 years. If midway through, it's found that this bill discount was more than, was maybe excessive, then the SJV discount would have will drop to 10%. Another component was tenant protections. I know folks here are really interested in that. I can talk more about that. Quickly, this was an agreement signed between a tenant, the landlord, and the community energy navigator, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But basically, they would sign an agreement protecting the tenant from evictions or unreasonable rent increases. And it's enforced by this community energy navigator, who's essentially a member of the community that's hired as part of this pilot program. And violation of it would just bar the landlord from future participation in this program. And then lastly, I'll say there were efforts to promote local workforce development. And again, I can talk about that more later. So here's the structure of the pilot. These are sort of the cast of characters. There are investor-owned utilities. So we're talking about SoCal Gas, Southern California Edison, and Pacific Gas and Electric. They administer the pilots in each of their service territories. And then we also have sort of a third-party implementer, which is the RHA. And the idea here was to sort of test out the difference between a third-party administrator and an IO or a utility administering the program. There's also the pilot implementer, which installs the measures, and the Community Energy Navigator Program Manager, or the CPM. This was a community-based organization called Self-Help Enterprises. And this was a model wherein Self-Help Enterprise would hire and manage a group of community energy navigators, which were residents are based in each of the communities who are hired to do outreach and enrollment. And the idea here was to have a trusted local resident to sort of talk to people about the program and enroll them. And it was sort of a novel model that was tested out through this pilot. Okay, so I will, I think I talked about this already, so I'm gonna skip that and I can go into that more if there are questions about it. So progress thus far, we're actually wrapping up these pilots pretty soon. They're still underway, but we've treated about 623 homes that have received full installations, which is about 38% of all eligible homes. The average cost per home to install all of these measures and appliances, remediation, et cetera, has been around $22,000. And for about 85% of the homes, they didn't exceed this $5,000 cap for remediation, which was set as part of the pilot, which I think is notable because I think that was a question mark. How much is it going to take to remediate some of these homes to actually make them electrification ready? But I will say for homes that exceeded this $5,000 cap, costs were really quite high, and that was a lot for manufactured housing. And I can talk again more about that, why that is, but generally I would say most of the homes we were able to be remediated within the cap.
Hi, Alyssa. Just letting you know you have less than 2 minutes left.
Okay. All right. I'll try to. So I think this slideshow should be available to folks. So I'm just going to talk about high-level points and challenges and lessons learned here. I'll say that one of the big lessons learned here is the way that the approach that we took was, for lack of a better word, a scattershot approach. So approaching all 11 communities at once, so doing the outreach all at once, doing the installations all at once, instead of a more targeted community by community approach, whereby maybe you would do the outreach in Fairmead, and then you would do the installations there, and then you would move on to the next community. And this ended up causing a lot of, doing a scattershot approach ended up causing a lot of delays and redundancy. And the reason is because batching would have created sort of more efficiency. For example, a lot of these homes need electric service upgrades, which require the utilities to come out and help perform those upgrades. if they're able to batch those requests, it can be done sort of more efficiently and at once. But the way that it sort of happened in this pilot was that one customer would get their upgrades, and then maybe a year later their neighbor would get an upgrade, and that ended up being a big cause of delay. And waiting for the utilities to do these upgrades was, sometimes we had to wait months, and that caused delays for work crews, and that made so that work crews weren't able to keep steady crews of work, or I guess folks working for them, because just there wasn't a steady stream of work. And I'll also say it affected participation too. I think a lot of participants expressed wanting to see completed installations in their communities before signing up. And that just wasn't as effective with the scattershot approach, where maybe one community got one installation and then another community got two installations, and there were a lot of delays, as I was saying. So I think this was a big lesson learned, is trying to do a targeted community by community approach. Jenny, am I over time already?
You are just right on time.
Okay. Okay, I'll just say one more thing. I think that I hope Kiara can talk a little bit more about labor shortages, workforce development, but labor shortages were a big issue for this program. We weren't able to hire a bunch locally. There was a general shortage of all sort of electricians, plumbers, HVAC technicians. And so that was a big struggle of this program. And then manufactured housing, like I said earlier, there were issues with getting permits with the housing community development, and also excessive remediation costs for this type of housing stock. Okay, there are a lot more things that I want to talk about, but I will turn it over to questions. So yeah, thanks.
So, okay, sorry. So there's a number of questions that has come in. So the first one is from Sev. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. Was the CH4 build out included as a requirement in the bill? AKA, knowing what we know now about CH4, might we change course to electricity?
It wasn't specifically outlined in the bill. It was just deemed as affordable energy options. And so, in that case, for some communities that were really close to gas lines, maybe that was gas line extensions. But I mean, we know where policy is headed. It's towards building electrification at this point, I think. So, yeah.
And then we have a question from Jared. His question is, do you envision this pilot program expanding statewide? And I'm going to add a follow-up question that was similar to something I had.
Sure.
Was that for financing to expand this pilot? Are you considering finishing electrification in the remaining homes in the pilot communities? Because you said only there's 60% remaining, or is the next step only to expand to the other 170 plus communities?
I don't really know what the next steps are. I think it depends on what the evaluation says. I mean, the intent is to see what is feasible to extend to the, so there were 187 communities that identified as San Joaquin Valley disadvantaged communities as part of this, under the definition of the statute. And so the idea is to expand this program, maybe not in this current iteration, but to the other communities. Statewide, beyond the San Joaquin Valley, that's not in the scope of this current program or in the statute.
We have a question from our CRC staff. Can you talk more about the eviction enforcement? Like, does it cover all reasons for eviction, only just cause? If you can talk about the protection against unreasonable rent increases, what counts as reasonable, and who makes that determination, and the outreach and education that was done for tenants to make sure they understood their rights under the agreement. And if that's too long, that's in the Q&A box for you to read.
Sure. Yeah, I can link to the actual resolution that talks about the tenant protections. These are the reasons. These are the only reasons that a landlord is allowed to evict a tenant under the agreement. And the rent increase is limited to 3.6% on a year-by-year basis. And there's supposed to be initial data collection from the CEN about what is sort of deemed the baseline of which, that rent amount is from when the agreement starts. But let me try to link the resolution in there that describes it in more detail.
Thank you, Alyssa.
Sure.
And then a question related to EV charging. Did they also get EV charging infrastructure for this, like even an outlet or receptacle to plug a future charger in? If not, can you share the reason for why it was included?
It wasn't within the scope of the program. The homes received a 200 amp service and panels generally, and the idea was to potentially accommodate future EV charging, even if those measures weren't installed as part of the pilot.
And we have another question from, I'll give you a quick easy one. Is the program for both single and multifamily housing?
It was open to both, I believe, but we were only treating single family homes in the end. But I will say it was for site built and manufactured housing.
And then it's being barred from future participation in publicly funded electrification programs enough of a disincentive for landlords to evict in violation of the agreement? I imagine if they electrified many and all their appliances, they have no real need for future public funding.
It's a good question. I think it depends who you ask. I mean, there was a big debate about this. Again, in the resolution, you can see there were a lot of advocates who were pushing for much more stringent tenant protections, and the CPUC ultimately decided that it was not within the CPUC's jurisdiction to have sort of more to enforce renter protections that were stricter than what was in this agreement. I don't think I can say definitively if it's enough of an incentive, but there are certainly folks who think it's not. So.
And following a little bit back on the multifamily, are any of the future pilots going to include multifamily?
I think we're certainly open to it. I really don't know what the next iteration is going to look like. We're still trying to finish the pilots, but I will say that these proceedings really rely on a lot of public stakeholder input, and so whenever this proceeding is reopened, it's closed now, or a new proceeding is opened, I mean, that's certainly something people should advocate or can advocate for.
And I have one last question. Has educational materials, guides, or training been developed specific to this pilot program? And if yes, is there a potential to share them broadly for other programs who are making similar efforts? Sorry, that was a question I prepared beforehand.
Wait, sorry, can you say that again?
So just curious about educational materials because you're reaching out to the communities. So have materials, guides, or training been developed specifically for this program for the pilots? And is there potential to expand that broadly to other programs who are making similar efforts to kind of like share your educational materials?
Educational materials for the customers or for, I don't know who asked the question. There are certainly lots of educational materials. There are those for the customers, those for the folks who are doing outreach, those for the CPM. Let's see if someone specified. I'll have to check if I can share them. I don't see why I wouldn't be able to, but my email is, oops, no, I lost it. I'll put my email in the chat, and you can contact me if you have more questions.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you for your time. If you have any last words before I pass the floor on to Kiara.
I'll just say that there are a lot of resources. I'll post the link to the docket card where you can find a bunch of information about all of this, as well as a process evaluation that was conducted about the pilots. But this is it's existed years before me and has many more years ahead of it. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, so moving on to our final speaker, Kiara Ariano. Kiara is the High Road Initiatives Policy Manager at Rising Sun Center for Opportunity, a nonprofit workforce development organization working at the intersection of economic equity and climate resilience in the California Bay Area and San Joaquin County. With offices in Oakland and Stockton, Rising Sun's programs specialize in preparing youth, women, and individuals in reentry for high road careers and green pathways that offer family-sustaining wages. Kiara manages the growing array of Rising Sun's policy work, which focuses on systems change advocacy for equitable access to quality career pathways in the emerging decarbonization transition. This includes facilitating and managing the Bay Area High Road Training Partnership, as well as participation in the California Green New Deal Coalition and other statewide policy advocacy efforts. Her previous work on equitable community engagement in the implementation of the City of Oakland's Climate Action Plan and her studies in environmental justice and Indigenous sovereignty shape her approach to climate action, community building, and collective liberation. Kiara, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Jenny. It's always wild hearing your one's introduction read back to you. Let's see, can everyone see this? Okay, perfect. So hi, everyone. I'm Kiara Ariano. As Jenny said, I work with Rising Sun Center for Opportunity. I'm their policy person, and I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of our High Road Training Partnership. And just before I get going, I'm getting over a cold, so thank you for bearing with my brain fog and also my stuffy voice. So a little bit of background on our High Road Training Partnership. HRTPs, which is what we shorten the acronym to, are funded via the California Workforce Development Board, and they essentially are working towards, sorry, this graphic has a lot going on, but they're essentially working in industries that are considered quote unquote low road. We'll get into what we mean by low road versus high road in just a second. But for our HRTP, each one is focused in a different industry. So some of the first ones were in care worker industries, service worker industries, things like that, promoting worker organizing to elevate job quality. And ours is focused in residential building decarbonization, specifically within the 9-county Bay Area region. So something that we sort of were started realizing in the beginning of this partnership was that we needed to acknowledge this sort of North Star of our partnership and all these what feel currently like competing interests that we're trying to balance. And so inherently in bringing together partners, everyone has their specific avenues, their specific lens that they are bringing to the table and what their first priority is. And the whole point of a partnership is how do we find common ground and move forward on our collective vision. So how do we make sure that none of these are trade-offs with each other? How do we make sure that we're moving rapidly on climate action while also being aware of tenant protections that need to happen? How do we make sure that we are ensuring that contractors, small, minority, diverse contractors are able to compete while still making sure that we're elevating and uplifting workers? Like, how do we make it so that these aren't trade-offs for each other? So that was our big vision. And then within that vision, we kind of focused in on our niche within this ecosystem. So this is part of why I was really excited about this project that Build It Green has been bringing forward, of this sort of mapping and how it very much correlates with our North Star as a partnership, because it recognizes that there are so many different actors in this space that are helping further this. So our HRTP can't do it all. We can't be a tenants' rights organizing entity at the same time as being a public health activism entity, as well as being on the climate action side. We're working in tandem and in conjunction and in trust with the fact that others are moving around us in the same movement so that we can all move towards this collective vision of what equitable housing decarbonization would be. So our focus, if we get into what our niche is and where we can really further, our HRTP is really focused on the job quality and the workforce element of the equitable building decarb transition. So our vision is a residential building decarbonization industry that supports quality jobs, engages a qualified workforce, and provides stable career pathways for disadvantaged workers, while simultaneously reducing greenhouse gas emissions and building more resilient communities. So we're really focused on that worker side of the equation. So a little bit about what do I mean when I say high road versus low road? So low road, it's somewhat intuitive. This is industries or work where it's low paying, maybe there's a lack of benefits, maybe there's lack of avenues to enforce labor laws, there's lots of room for exploitation, things like that. Basically those jobs that just they're not quality jobs. They're not jobs that you want to be doing. They're not adding to your quality of life. And so the antithesis of that is the high road approach. So there's a lot on this, and this is a framework that's pulled from a very foundational report from the UC Labor Center. It's called Putting California on the High Road, a Jobs and Climate Action Plan for 2030, which was chartered by the state legislature. And it outlines this difference between low road and high road, and it talks through what are the different strategies and levers and policy interventions that can happen in an industry, specifically in the decarbonization transition, to elevate us from a low road to a high road. So when we talk about the residential building electrification movement, that's building on the current residential construction industry, which at times has had these characteristics of low road. It's pretty under the table, unpermitted. It can be low paying. There can be a lack of benefits. It can be very one-off jobs. And that is not necessarily all on the employers themselves. It's also just the model that the industry has been working with for a super long time, where when contractors go in and they give bids to homeowners, usually the thing that is prioritized is the lowest cost. So if a contractor is going in and having to operate in what we call this race to a bottom model, then they're trying to find ways where they can cut out costs or where they can estimate costs as lower. So oftentimes that comes out of the labor estimate, or they'll lowball an estimate and then end up going far beyond that, versus if you have a union contractor that comes in, they have to give an estimate with those more accurate higher wages, and their estimate might come out a little closer to that in the long run, but they might not win that bid because on the onset their bid was higher because they have higher labor costs, because they're providing family sustaining wages and benefits and all of those things. So that's a little bit about what we're talking about when we say low road versus high road. So our high road training partnership is focused on how do we put in place standards? How do we focus on these these levers so that we can help elevate the floor, so that what we consider high road contractors are able to compete, are able to employ folks in a good quality way. So a couple of considerations. There's an interesting transition we're seeing when we're talking about high road and using this model, where we're moving away from the previous dynamic of focusing on just the workforce training side. So we start thinking about this demand and supply of labor. So this gets to something, Alyssa, that you were saying about there was a demand for workers and it was really hard to fill those worker roles. So in previous iterations of green job training and just transition, such as the ARA era with solar, there was this big push, like, we're gonna train a bunch of people and we're gonna get everyone to work doing solar jobs, and it's gonna be great. It's gonna be a huge economic recovery strategy. So they trained a bunch of people, and Rising Sun actually used to do solar training. And then we started realizing that we were sort of training folks to nowhere. So either there wasn't demand for the jobs, so we were training people, but there weren't jobs to then catch them after they were trained, or we were training people, but the quality of those jobs was low quality. So we weren't necessarily helping them access careers. We were building a bridge to nowhere. So this is why our high road training partnership is really focused on balancing the supply and demand of labor. So how do we make sure there's demand for the projects, which comes from the customers? It comes from programs that are generating that project demand. It comes from cities that are figuring out how to design programs in a good way and build a very direct pipeline So then we're training folks, and we are partnered with the local building trades councils and labor unions because they have a pretty surefire apprenticeship program training pathway already in place. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel there.
Hi, Kiara, just letting you know you have 2 minutes.
Perfect, thank you. So that's where we want to then bring this into balance a bit more. And that's what, when we think about policy interventions or we think about how we're designing building decarb programs, that has to be a key consideration. Sorry for the low quality of this visual, but this is also another consideration that we think about when we're creating demand for jobs. So we want there to be both quality and access. So my old boss used to say, high quality jobs without access is exclusion, and high access without quality is exploitation. So we kind of need both. We don't want quality jobs, but for them to be extremely exclusive. In the past, when we talk about union pathways into construction, it's been largely white, it's been largely male, and we're trying to expand that to be more accessible because union pathways are high quality job pathways, but if they're not inclusionary, then we're not really achieving justice. Versus maybe certain positions have been super accessible, but the quality has been very low. So we're trying to get to that green dot out there where we're increasing both access and quality, because while Alyssa is saying that it was hard to find people to do this work, we're also hearing on the other side that there's so many people that are waiting to get trained to get into this work, and contractors are hesitant to bring more people on because they're worried they won't have enough work for them, or they're worried that they won't be able to sustain their business off of this. So it doesn't make sense, or it makes sense that there's a bottleneck in between the amount of projects, which there's a huge amount of projects. We need to decarbonize every single building in the entire world. And so the demand is there, and there's a ton of people in need of quality jobs. So it's figuring out what is this bottleneck between the two that we can help create a better flow. So very quickly, this is a lot of words. Essentially, these are the principles that our partnership operates with. It really is just that we need to be meeting the market where it is and talking both with the largely non-union contractors who are currently doing this work and union partners who want to enter this space. We want to support minority, BIPOC, women-owned contractors, small-scale contractors to be the best employers they can be and give them the supportive services they need to do that. We want to help workers who have been historically excluded from these high-quality careers to access them. We want to do so by advocating for labor standards, and we want to aim to increase the participation of high-road union contractors to help lift up that job quality floor for the market and set those standards. So the final thing, Jenny, do I have time for this, or should I wrap up?
You have time, go for it.
Okay, great. So the last thing is just at a very high level, how we're thinking about these sort of policy interventions is it in this 3-tier approach. So we want to set a floor. So that's a baseline of like, we at the very least want to see in publicly funded programs or programs that we are investing in this quality of this level of job quality. So this level of pay, this level of benefits, like maybe it's not the best, most ideal health coverage, but there's health coverage at the very least, which some of these positions don't even have. There's consistent scheduling, things like that. Then we also want to have that far-reaching ideal of like, we want portable benefits that reach this tier of coverage for the individual and their dependents. So maybe that's the like shooting for the stars. And then we want to create these pathways, so these additional supportive entities that Danny was talking about that can help folks meet those standards and help folks move farther along that high road pathway. So we can't just say, we want you to pay prevailing wage, but then not provide the services to help them do that if they aren't already set up to do so, because there's a lot of administrative backend to make that happen. So if someone wants to be able to do that, but isn't currently equipped, we don't want them to get knocked out of the market just because they aren't positioned to yet. We want to help them meet that standard to be the best employer that they can be. Okay, That was a lot of information. Thank you all for listening, and thank you, Build It Green, for having Rising Sun here to talk on this perspective in the building decarb transition. This is an area of equity that's starting to come more on the table, but has not necessarily been at the forefront. So we appreciate it. And I'll drop my email in the chat, but we are currently covering the 9-county Bay Area and are looking to really make that representative. So if you're interested in learning more about the partnership, I'm happy to chat with you and would love to let you know what we're doing.
Thank you, Kiara. So I have a question for you. So it takes time to go on the high road approach, as you were sharing, and this is like a novel one for people to get into. So how do you like maintain that patience and hope as you work towards bringing your partnership principles to life in the Bay Area communities and programs when they are used to the common road rules approach?
That is a great question. I think there are days where, I really have to bring myself back. And I think it's having really wonderful, supportive partners. Danny and BEI is part of our partnership, having good thought partners to kind of litmus test things with and be like, how the heck are we going to do this? I think it's also coming back. The reason that we have grounding principles, and I come back to this a lot, I don't know if this is helpful for other people, but like having a foundation of, this is our ideal, this is our vision, this is what we want. Like we can all agree that we want workers to be paid well. Like we all agree that we want workers to have the flexibility that they could take a vacation with their family. Like that's a very fundamental, easy thing for us to agree on. Maybe we get caught up in the logistics of how. But like coming back to these like super easy, tangible principles that we are just like easy to get on board with feels important. And then I think taking like bite-sized pieces of, okay, we're not going to be able to touch the entire market. Like so much of this market happens under the table, and maybe right now that's okay. Like one area of our scope I didn't necessarily clarify is that we're really talking about labor standards on publicly funded programs. For example, the program that Alyssa is helping facilitate. So how do we make sure that we're just like staying focused where we can influence, because we can't help it if your neighbor needs to replace their water heater and they go to their cousin, like we're not going to be able to touch the process ultimately. So like remembering where I can focus my efforts.
Thank you, Kiara. I think we have time for one final question directed for Kiara. So if anyone has one, feel free to raise your hand, and this goes out to anyone in the audience or even the panelists, Danny and Lisa, if you have one directed to Kiara. If not, we'll move on to the diagram, but I just want to save that space because I know, as Kiara was saying, this is a lot to digest at the end. So as you're processing it, we totally understand that as well. So if anyone comes up with any questions, I feel free to add it to the Q&A. I am going to move on to the next section, but before that, I want to give a huge round of applause to all our panelists today. Thank you for sharing your story, making the time to connect with us, and just grounding us in everything. So yay, thank you. I was going to ask if everyone can set up a virtual round of applause to just say thank you. And if you have any other questions, feel free to share their emails in the chat, as well as I think a few more questions are coming up. And I think we have a person that's raising their hand. Did I see that correctly? Okay, if not, so feel free to add your question in the Q&A box. If I can ask Kiara, Danny, or Lisa, if you can just check those boxes, see any questions for that. But just thank you. Just thank you so much for your time and for being here. And so now that everyone is acquainted, so we're going to move on to the workshop session. So sadly, I am going to remove everyone's spotlight. Now that everyone's acquainted with the visual diagram for equitable housing decarbonization from the introductions and grounded from on the ground stories and presentation, we wanted to provide the space and time now for y'all to kind of have a hand in building out the diagram I kind of shared out at the beginning of the program. So Chloe will share a Mural link for everyone to access this diagram. And as you have heard today, equitable housing decarbonization is a complicated space with many interwoven relationships to keep in mind. So I'm hoping to lean on each of your expertise and your unique experience that you bring to this space to uplift any key visions that you're missing or feedback that you would like to have considered in the diagram. And you do not have to write out the perfect sentence in any of these bubbles, so just no worries about that. Just brainstorm freely, write as much as you like on what you feel is missing or you think should be added, and our team at Build a Green will refine it. So let me quickly share a walkthrough of the mural. So it won't be a huge confusion for those who haven't used Mural before. So first, if you look at the lower right-hand corner, there is a navigation setting down here. So if you click on it, just ensure that you are in the right mode, mouse mode or trackpad mode, because the way you zoom in and move across the screen differs. Because for a mouse pad, you zoom in with your mouse wheel, and then you click and drag with your mouse pointer to move across the diagram. With your trackpad mode, you would pinch to zoom in and you use 2 fingers to swipe back and forth. So I just want to point that out so it's easy for you guys to kind of zoom in, see all of that. And then at the edges of each of these circles or elements, there are empty stickies for you guys to use. So let me zoom in so you guys can see what all these are. So I am in the mouse mode. So zooming in, you can see I'm zooming in. And then at the edge of each of the diagram, if you need to zoom in further to kind of read it, feel free. And you can zoom back out for easy movement. But the edge of each of these elements are empty stickies. So feel free to click on it, drag it to where you would like to add your thoughts, and then double click on it to enter your text. So that is how you would add some comments. So the smaller ones are like visions, and if you feel like there's another theme that's missing, feel free to use the bigger circle. And if you want to comment on a specific bubble, you can do it via 2 ways. You can right click it and it will say you can add a comment to it. So you can add a comment specifically to that. Or if that just feels too complicated, because again, this is a lot to take in all at once, just feel free to drag a sticky and to write your thoughts next to it. So that is a quick tutorial on just how to move around the diagram. And we'll be using the rest of the time here to just have heads down time, just jam on this diagram a little bit for you to take in, see if any parts that you feel are missing, or just get acquainted with it. I'm going to stop my screen share, and I will also share music for you to have some heads down time. Hey everyone, thank you all for joining us, and hope you're walking away with new ideas, insights, or feeling an overall sense of inspiration. So we'll be sharing the event recording, chat log, and presentation slides next week. Before you go, we would love to welcome you to share your feedback on this event in the survey. Chloe has shared a link to it in the chat box. Also, if you enjoyed these intersectional discussions, follow us by joining our newsletter. And our event is officially over, but we'll hold this space open for a little while longer for any additional lingering conversations you guys would like to have, or questions, or you just want to continue to jam on the mural. And the mural will continue to be remaining open after this event and editable after this event, so you do not need to remain on for that.